Hey everybody. So there has been, in the light of my last couple of videos, there's been considerable interest in me doing an extended commentary on White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and so I want to begin that process today. Reading the book for the first time was an emotionally draining experience for me, and I normally don't like to be one of these triggered snowflake type people. But the way this book is written, it's essentially a Kafka trap. The idea is you are racist, you have always been racist, and any attempt to disagree with Robin DiAngelo is in fact proof that you're racist. And so when I read it the first time, it was an extremely emotionally taxing experience. It is not a long book, but it took me many months to get through. So I'm going to go through what I'm going to do now with this book. A lot of people have already spoken up and refuted the premise of the book, as have I, as being philosophically and logically fallacious. So what I want to do is, rather than dissect every sentence as I have been wont to do in the past, I want to instead just focus on things that really stood out to me. Things that might not get covered in a general dissection of the overall ideas in the book. I want to clarify something out front. Despite what Robin DiAngelo would like you to think, this commentary that I'm doing is not in any way, shape, or form meant to be any kind of advocacy for any sort of white supremacy or racism or anything like that. I believe that Robin DiAngelo is wrong. I think it is good to find solutions for racism. I simply believe Robin DiAngelo has the wrong solution. So if we can put on our big boy pants and go forward with that, maybe we can reach some higher ground. Now, getting into it, and also I want to say, what I'm referencing here, there's this thing on YouTube that purports to be an audio book of White Fragility. I don't think it's an official audio book because it sounds like, I have a program on my PC called Natural Reader, and it sounds like the voice from Natural Reader. I think, especially because there are certain points where it stops on words that it can't pronounce for whatever reason and spells the letters out. And so I think that leads me to think that they're using Natural Reader, and maybe somebody just scanned a PDF in and created a bootleg audiobook. That said, all of the excerpts that you hear are covered within the fair use doctrine for the purpose of commentary and criticism and education on matters of public interest. So, the first thing I want to look at, they're just trying to be as concise as possible. Something that was curious to me is this little comment that towards the beginning that Robin DiAngelo makes about the concept of passing as white, or indeed passing as any other race.
For multiracial people is further complicated by the racial identity of their parents and the racial demographics of the community in which they are raised. For example, though a child may look black and be treated as black, she may be raised primarily by a white parent and thus identify more strongly as white. The dynamics of what is termed passing being perceived as white will also shape a multiracial person's identity, as passing will grant him or her society's rewards of whiteness. However, people of mixed racial heritage who pass as white may also experience resentment and isolation from people of color who cannot pass. Multiracial people may not be seen as real people of color or real whites. It is worth noting that though the term passing refers to the ability to blend in as a white person, there is no corresponding term for the ability to pass as a person of color. This highlights the fact that, in a racist society, the desired direction is always toward whiteness and away from being perceived as a person.
Actually, Robin, yes, there is a term for that. It's called passing as black. Passing may be slang in one particular context for black people or people of color who can otherwise pass as being white, but it is not limited to that one singular context. Yes, it is possible indeed for white people to pass as black. Rachel Dolezal did it for years. And then if you go into the dare I say, gender non-conforming community, people will routinely use the term passing to refer to successfully passing themselves off as the gender that they identify as. That's especially a common term among, drag queens, transvestites, people who are essentially not trying to become one or the other gender, but rather simply cosplay as that gender. So, no, this term does exist, and this is something we're going to see throughout the book, is that Robin DiAngelo just kind of decides that her meaning is the only meaning. Now, what I really want to get at in this video is this next segment where, by way of introduction, Robin DiAngelo describes the types of encounters she was having as a diversity coordinator that led her to want to write this book.
I am a white woman. I am standing beside a black woman. We are facing a group of white people seated in front of us. We are in their workplace and have been hired by their employer to lead them in a dialogue about race. The room is filled with tension and charged with hostility. I have just presented a definition of racism that includes the acknowledgement that whites hold social and institutional power over people of color. A white man is pounding his fist on the table. As he pounds, he yells, "A white person can't get a job anymore." I look around the room and see 40 employees, 38 of whom are white. Why is this white man so angry? Why is he being so careless about the impact of his anger?
If people are caught up in the heat of the moment like that, they probably are not going to be thinking about the consequences of their actions at all. But in any event, something that other people have pointed out that I want to reiterate here is she just kind of assumes that this person, apparently he was real, or if he's hypothetical, whichever. She assumes that this person is necessarily referring to the people in the room, or that he does not have a larger argument that is otherwise defeated by the presence of the other people in the room. So that guy could have been, he could have been faced, some kind of firing from a job over some kind of diversity quota, or he could have family members that are having trouble finding work, or he could have grown up watching his dad struggle to find work, or something like that. He could be referring to something concrete, and by not engaging with that, what Robin DiAngelo does is just set this guy up as an avatar for whatever she wants to lay on him.
Why doesn't he notice the effect this outburst is having on the few people of color in the room? Why are all the other white people either sitting in silent agreement with him or tuning out?
If they're sitting silently, then you don't know that they're agreeing with him.
I have, after all, only articulated a definition of racism. White people in North America live in a society that is deeply separate and unequal by race, and white people are the beneficiaries of that separation and inequality. As a result, we are insulated from racial stress, at the same time that we come to feel entitled to and deserving of our advantage. Given how seldom we experience racial discomfort in a society we dominate, we haven't had to build our racial stamina. Socialized into a deeply internalized sense of superiority that we either are unaware of or can never admit to ourselves, we become highly fragile in conversations about race. We consider a challenge to our racial worldviews as a challenge to our very identities as good, moral people. Thus, we perceive any attempt to connect us to the system of racism as an unsettling and unfair moral offense. The smallest amount of racial stress is intolerable. The mere suggestion that being white has meaning often triggers a range of defensive responses. These include emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and withdrawal from the stress-inducing situation. These responses work to reinstate white equilibrium as they repel the challenge, return our racial comfort, and maintain our dominance within the racial hierarchy.
All biological organisms will respond to a threat to their equilibrium with an emotional response that is geared towards returning to a state of calm. That is because the state of calm is naturally associated with the experience of being safe and out of harm's way. To pretend that white people as a sociobiological construct are experiencing this on different grounds than everybody else is special pleading. In my own time as a commentator on various controversial topics, I have angered all sorts of people: white, black, male, female, Hispanic, Asian, Indian, transgendered, cisgendered, homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, furry, whatever. Pick a demographic. I've probably pissed off somebody in that group. The fact that I've successfully pissed somebody off does not in any way, shape, or form indicate that my position is inherently correct. This is absolutely the idea that this woman is masqueraded around as a legitimate academic when her premise literally boils down to I have angered you, therefore I am correct, is patently absurd. So the main thing we need to keep in mind going forward is that in all of these descriptions of these workplace encounters that she says she's had, there is one crucial element that is consistently left out, and that is we don't know specifically what she said or how she said it. But we have to stop and think that if people are having these viscerally negative reactions to reading the book, they are probably also having viscerally negative actions to the things that she's saying in these lectures. The things that she's saying in these lectures are probably not constructive. They are probably not helpful in any way, shape, or form. They are probably getting on people's nerves and getting under people's skin the same way that the book is. And I will elaborate on this as we go through this clip, but I think that what's happening here is, the real problem here is that Robin DiAngelo does not understand that her job as a diversity coordinator is to make it so that people of different backgrounds can comfortably work together in the workplace. That's the job. It's not so that she can come riding in on a white horse, a white identifying horse, and and save the whole world from the scourge of systemic racism. That's not within the bounds of her job. Her job is far more narrowly defined than that. I speculate, in the absence of what she's actually saying to these people, I speculate that it's something like that.
I conceptualize this process as white fragility. Though white fragility is triggered by discomfort and anxiety, it is born of superiority and entitlement. White fragility is not weakness per se. In fact, it is a powerful means of white racial control and the protection of white advantage. Summarizing the familiar patterns of white people's responses to racial discomfort as white fragility has resonated for many people. The sensibility is so familiar because whereas our personal narratives vary, we are all swimming in the same racial water. For me, the recognition has come through my work. I have a rare job. On a daily basis I lead primarily white audiences in discussions of race, something many of us avoid at all costs. In the early days of my work as what was then termed a diversity trainer, I was taken aback by how angry and defensive so many white people became at the suggestion that they were connected to racism in any way. The very idea that they would be required to attend a workshop on racism outraged them. They entered the room angry and made that feeling clear to us throughout the day as they slammed their notebooks down on the table, refused to participate in exercises, and argued against any and all points.
Excuse me, I have a question. How many of these workshops involved having to come into the office on Saturday?
I couldn't understand their resentment or disinterest in learning more about such a complex social dynamic as racism. These reactions were especially perplexing when there were few or no people of color in their workplace, and they had the opportunity to learn from my co-facilitators of color.
Well, to put it very simply, Robin, they may just not be that interested. And I know that there is this automatic emotional bully ragging that comes in the form of people saying, oh, well, it's only their whiteness that allows them to not be interested, and people of color have no choice but to be interested. They have to live in the within the bounds of white supremacy from which they can never escape, etc., etc., etc. Well, it's setting aside the fact that you're purporting to speak on behalf of millions and millions and millions of people when you talk about what all people of color are experiencing, the simple reality, Robin, is that people can be interested in finding solutions for racial problems, but simply not be interested in what you have to say or having an adverse reaction to what you are having to say specifically. And that's the thing. Robin DiAngelo throughout this book is completely incapable of reflecting on her own actions and thinking that maybe she's not doing her job well. She's completely unaware, completely outside the bounds of this idea. Look, Robin, if your job is to be a diversity coordinator and everywhere you go you are having these horrible negative reactions from people, you may need to rethink how you're doing the job. But no, you're going into it from an antagonistic perspective. You're going into it from the assumption that if there is any negativity expressed by these people, it is necessarily on them. And sorry, you're the only common denominator. And if in any job environment, if you are the only common denominator and everything gets fucked up every time you walk in the room, the problem is most likely you.
I assumed that in these circumstances, an educational workshop on racism would be appreciated. After all, didn't the lack of diversity indicate a problem, or at least suggest that some perspectives were missing?
The only way it could indicate a problem is if the job in question requires an abundance of the people from a specific demographic to do that job. For example, when the Saudi government had their regular symposium on women's issues, and the attendees, the presenters and the attendees were entirely men because of the deeply patriarchal society that they live in, then it's abundantly clear that there is an issue when we're talking about women's issues, women's health issues, women's rights under the law, that sort of thing, with absolutely no presence from women whatsoever. It's pretty clear that there's only one direction where that discussion is intended to go. On the other hand, if we are talking about, you know, a business where people are a company where people are supposed to hammer out widgets on an assembly line or whatever, hammering out widgets on an assembly line does not involve race, regardless of what Robin DiAngelo would like you to think. No, it involves a series of mechanical processes, and if you are able to do them, it matters not what race you are. So, no, the absence of a particular demographic in a certain area does not indicate a particular problem. And I will make that point for you. When I was I will rhetorically prove that point for you. When I was right out of college, I was looking for any job I could get just to keep my head above water. I still am looking for any job I can get just to keep my head above water, but that's another story. Anyway, I was looking for any job I could get, and I got a job at an A.J. Wright department store. It was in an extraordinarily, overwhelmingly black part of Atlanta. And I was one of maybe 3 or 4 white people that were hired on when the store was initially opened. The idea is it started out as temporary work, and the people who did the best were the people who did the absolute best would get hired on as regular staff, and everybody else would be let go. So for weeks and for a couple of weeks, I worked unloading shipping crates and cracking them open with a crowbar and unboxing things and all of that. And then once the store actually opened, I worked with I worked on the sales floor and all of that stuff, and did all of those things. And then when the probationary period was over, I, along with the 3 or 4 other white people that had been working there, were all let go, and the remaining staff was 100% black. Now, Robin DiAngelo, does that, in your mind, indicate a problem? I think not. I think you perceive this problem as being entirely one-directional. Now, stop and reiterate, take that experience that I had and attach the possibility of a similar experience to the white guy at that corporation that you mentioned originally that has his fit, throws a fit. Now, rest assured, if I have to go to one of these things, I'm not going to be one of the people that throws a fit. My automatic response to these kinds of things is to just get it the fuck over with. If we have to, like, if we have to sit there and listen to you bitch and moan, that's just more time we have to spend in this room with this scowling harpy. So don't have the negative reactions, is what I'm saying. So I'm not the kind of person that's going to pipe up in that manner in this kind of environment. But take that experience and the knowledge that society as a whole does not give a shit that they did something blatantly racist when they cut the white people and only the white people, as far as I could tell. But they did cut all of the white people. When they cut every single one of the white people and had an overwhelmingly black staff, we all know, I know, everybody else knows, that is a completely one-sided issue. If it had been reversed and 4 black employees had been cut, leaving an entirely white staff, it would cause a media sensation, a national uproar. We would need to have a dialogue about et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you flip the roles, you're just getting what you had coming to you, is essentially what it boils down to. Now, understand something when I say that. I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to have a pissing contest with the black experience of racism in this country. What I am trying to say is that we all do get smacked in the face with these things. And it's better, if you want to have a real, honest discussion and really mend some fences and really reach across the line, you need to acknowledge on a micro level the similarities. Because once we've acknowledged the similarities of experience on a micro level, then we can be in a much stronger, much more bonded, much more strengthened position. Much stronger, much more strengthened, the same thing. We can be in a better position to talk about the experiences on the macro level, rather than declaring unilaterally that white people are that what white people have to do is come to terms with the fact that they don't understand and they'll never understand. I do understand what it's like to be let go from a job because of your race. I've been there. I know what it's like to be mistreated by police officers because of your race. I've been there. I've experienced a lot of things because of my race, a lot of harassment because of my race. And if you can, and that's not to say that it's a frequent or ongoing or daily occurrence or anything like that, or a systemic problem, quote unquote, but if you can meet people halfway on the micro level, then they will be more likely to join you to solve the problem on the macro level. And that is so important. And that is something, see, the idea, the reason we don't do that is because people like Rob and DiAngelo are completely unwilling to entertain that idea, completely unwilling to entertain the idea that we form a bond over shared experience, that racism itself is the problem, and that we who have experienced racism exist independently of the problem. She can't do that. And that's something we have to understand as we deconstruct this book. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some insight. Like I said, I'm going to have to go back through this book again to do this, and that's going to be very emotionally taxing for me. So I don't know when I'm going to be doing another one of these videos, hopefully soon. In the meantime, there are other things on other unrelated topics that I'd like to talk about.